Hello everyone, my name is Maria and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't seen my previous videos, basically I've been doing a little series about everything that you should consider if you're thinking about coming to Germany to study your master's degree. I myself am originally from Venezuela. I studied industrial engineering and I came to Germany around 5 years ago to study my master's degree in Management and Engineering and Production Systems at RWTH Aachen University. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most important things, or the most important thing actually, I think, that you should consider before studying and living abroad, which is setting your budget. This is actually one of the main reasons that my husband and I chose Germany to study and live here and then later to work here, because it really is very affordable compared to other countries. So in today's video, I'll show you how you can start estimating your budget, and I'll be breaking down specifically which costs you should consider and give you some concrete examples based on my experience. However, please keep in mind that the costs that I'll be talking about are really heavily based on my experience, and you shouldn't take them as the absolute truth and just blindly base your budget on them, since every person's spending habit really is different. So anyways, please do your homework as to how much you will actually be spending. And to make this video not extremely long, I've broken it down into 2 videos. So in this video, I'll be covering the expenses that will eat up most of your cost, so between 70 to 80% of your total budget, which also means that they're the expenses where you're going to try to focus the most amount of energy in to make them as low as possible and optimize as much as you can. So these 3 expenses are basically tuition, rent, and food. And in the next video, which is linked somewhere here, we're going to be talking about the remaining 20 to 30% of your expenses. So all smaller expenses that will not take up as much as the 3 main ones that I'm going to explain here. I'm also going to be doing sort of a running tally with each part of the cost estimate, so that at the end you have sort of a ballpark number of what the total cost of living and studying in Germany might look like. I'm also going to be sharing what our costs look like when we studied here, so that you can have a better real-life reference. This video I've split into 3 parts. So first I'll give you a general overview of the cost in Germany and my impressions overall, and afterwards I'm going to be talking about tuition, followed by rent, and finally food costs. And at the end we're going to see what the subtotal looks like so far. So I think Germany really is a relatively inexpensive place to study and live in if you compare to other high-income countries. So I remember we did a lot of research in the beginning, and we were comparing Germany to other countries such as the US and the UK, for example. And in the end, really, Germany was the most cost-effective option for us. For example, going to study in North Carolina in the US, when we looked into rent prices there, the rent prices in North Carolina would cost even double as the ones in Aachen, which is the city that we ended up studying in Germany. And when comparing to the UK, for example, we looked into Cardiff, and there what you paid for just one single dorm room, with that price you would get an entire apartment back in Germany. And not just the rent cost, I mean the tuition costs were also a big factor for us to choose Germany. In the US, for example, the tuition fees are significantly more expensive than in Germany. So you can pay easily $15,000 for just one semester. And for that amount, you can afford an entire 2-year master's program in Germany. So in Germany, you can get really good, high-quality education, especially in engineering, which is just as good or even better than other countries for potentially half the price. And then after graduation, you can have even better possibilities and quality of life. But that we're going to cover in another video. So let's start off with tuition fees. And this really is where you're going to want to invest the most amount of energy in to try to optimize as much as you can, because they can potentially be really high and eat up a large part of your budget. So as I've mentioned before, in Germany, you basically have 2 types of programs. So you have the state-funded programs, which are public and funded by the government, and then you have the private-funded programs. So the public-funded are the most affordable, and they can easily cost you around 300 euros per semester. And then you have the private-funded programs, which can range all around and don't have a limit. So they can be anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 euros per semester, to even more expensive programs costing 10 to 15,000 euros or more per semester. So they can get really pricey. And as to quality, you can't really say that one program gives you a better quality of education or gives you more job opportunities than the other, because when you look into university and technical college rankings, they really include a mixture of both. But from a cost cost perspective, it's definitely better to get into a public funded program. So my approach would be to try to apply to as many of them as possible, while also applying to the private funded programs as well. This is because although you can say in the beginning that you aren't able to afford a private tuition, you could apply later to scholarship opportunities and financing options as well. But these options depend on having, first of all, a letter of acceptance at the beginning. I discussed this in other videos, but some examples of scholarships are the DAAD, also the KAAD, and as well as opportunities within your own country or in the university that you're applying to as well. Many times they have their own scholarship opportunities for accepted students. So my advice is to apply to as many programs as you can. So both the public and the private funded programs as well. Really the only constraint that you have when applying is time. So the time that you dedicate for each application. But the advantage for universities in Germany is that you don't have to pay upfront for a fee only to apply. In the US and Canada, for example, you can pay around 100 euros just to have the possibility of applying to the university. So definitely use that advantage when applying to German universities. So in my case, if you're wondering, I got accepted into a private funded program at RWTH, which cost 5,000 euros per semester, plus the semester contribution. However, afterwards, I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship in order to finance my studies. So we can use this as an example in our cost estimation. So in total, a 20,000 master's program for 2 years, plus the semester contribution, would boil down to around 900 euros per month. If you take the public funded program, which is, for example, the one that my husband studied, that would cost you around 300 euros per semester. So for a 2-year program, it would be around 50 euros per month, only for tuition. So you can see that it's a pretty big difference between the public and the private funded. Now let's move on to the next large cost in your cost estimation, which is rent. So rent prices, like in any place in the world, really vary depending on the city or the region that you're living in. And in Germany, it's no different. There is a very large variation depending on which part of Germany you're moving into. So if you look into larger cities or metropoles, these are significantly more expensive than any small town or small city. This is obviously because large cities have the most job opportunities available. They really are the economic centers of the country, and they have better transportation connections overall, which all causes more people to move there and the rent prices to go higher. But overall, if you want to make a sense of the rent and living cost in Germany, basically the more south that you go, the higher the prices are. So everything in the south of Germany, so the regions especially of Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, are the most expensive overall. Actually, the most expensive city in Germany is Munich. So Munich has a 17.51 euro per square meter cost, and it's followed by Frankfurt and then Stuttgart. Now, the cheapest rent that you can find in Germany is more located towards the east. So basically the area of Saxony where Leipzig and Dresden are located. So here, as you can see, you can find pretty affordable rent prices. So here around 7 euros per square meter, which is really very affordable for Germany. And they also have pretty good university programs as well, which is definitely a plus. And then located somewhere around the middle, if you're looking at the rent prices and cost in Germany as a whole, around the middle you would find the states of North Rhine-Westphalia and the northern states. So in these areas, if you're not living so close to the big cities, you could find really affordable smaller university towns and smaller cities to live in. So Aachen, for example, is 1 hour away from Cologne, so that makes it definitely much more affordable than living in Cologne itself. In Aachen, you can pay, for example, you can see here 8.69 euros per square meter. So in the northern states as well, if you move to a place not so close to Hamburg, which is definitely the largest city in the northern area, if you take Kiel, for example, or Bremen, these are really good university cities, and the rent prices are as well very affordable, around 8.33, 8.53 euros per square meters, as you can see. And in these smaller cities, which are almost like university towns, since in Aachen, for example, the whole city sort of revolves around the university, I find that these sort of towns or smaller cities are really the best place to study in Germany, since not only are they much more affordable than the larger cities such as Munich and Frankfurt, for example, but they're also more easy to move around in since they're smaller. And they also have sort of this more university town student vibe to them, so to say, so makes them really good for students to come, since you can really find a closer knit student community and really makes it easier to sort of meet people and socialize with other students as well. So another great resource that you can use to compare prices between between cities and different regions is a great website called Numbeo. So this website I'm also linking down below. We actually use this to research different price ranges between regions, and here you can compare any price, any cost of living between any two cities in the world. So in this example, we're comparing Aachen versus Munich. So when you log on to the Numbeo website, you just click under select location and type in the first city, in this case Aachen, and then you go compare this city with the second city, which would be Munich. And there you go, you have the results with the comparison. So just a quick side note, due to the fact that I filmed this video already some months ago and I'm just now editing it, you will notice some differences in the numbers that I'm saying, that I'm actually speaking in the video, and the ones that I'm showing you in the screenshots. But that's only because some months already passed and there is an increase in the cost of living of both cities. So that's why you'll notice a slight difference. And as you can see, they specify the rent per month in different types of apartments. So a one-bedroom apartment in the city center of Aachen would cost around 538 euros, according to Numbeo. And for the same apartment in Munich, you would pay double, more than double that amount, so 1,254 euros. So as you can see in this example, that's why it's super important to do your research beforehand, before deciding on a city to study in here, and really put the most effort into getting into the university that you want, because really these differences are really high between the city you choose to live in. So this is a great example of the really high price difference between living in a smaller city, sort of university town, versus a large metropolitan city like Munich. But now let's compare, for example, two small cities that also have really great universities. So let's compare Aachen versus Kiel. And you can see that in this case, the price differences aren't really that high, so around 10 to 6% difference between both of them. Aachen is a bit more expensive, I think, because of the really great university that they have there, which is RWTH, which is really a university that has a really high reputation within Germany, so that's likely attracting a higher number of students and people. But yeah, a much more manageable difference in comparison to the Munich example before. So these two websites that I showed you are really good to have a reference and an overall feel of how high the rent prices are between different cities. But in order to know concrete rent prices of what actual apartments would cost, I would recommend logging into housing websites to look for them. So you can log into any of the three major websites that people use here in Germany to search for apartments and houses online, which are Immobilienscout24.de, Immowelt.de, und bggesucht.de. I'm obviously pronouncing the name in a mixture of how you say the letters in English and in German, but you get the point. And I will have these websites again linked below, and I'll be going further into detail maybe in another video. Another good idea is to look into the websites of the universities that you're applying to, since they also publish estimated rent and living expenses of the city that the university is located at. Another great tip that I would give you is that if you're coming alone, to actually share your apartment with another person. So even though it might be more comfortable to live by yourself instead of sharing your flat or apartment with a stranger or somebody you don't know very well, from a cost perspective, it really makes a difference if there's more than one person living in the apartment in order to share the costs. So in this example, when we looked at the 3-bedroom apartment in the city center of Aachen, here you could really divide the cost between 3 people, for example, and pay around 340 euros per month. That is a pretty good difference if you compare monthly between paying the 340 euros with the 538 euros per month. It would be the same apartment located as well in the city center of Aachen, so close to everything that you need. And it's also not too bad to have company and live with other people when you're coming to a new country totally by yourself. So yeah, that's one thing to think about. And definitely the higher number of roommates that you have, the lower the cost for each person in the apartment, because obviously due to economies of scale. So the same rent prices is basically divided amongst a higher number of people. And if you go even one step further, you can decrease your cost even more and make things cheaper if you look into student housing. If you look into student housing, or dorms as they are also called, here the rent is going to be even cheaper because you're basically renting only one room, and then you're sharing basically a large kitchen and bathrooms with a high number of other students. For this, again, look into the website of the university that you're interested in, since they usually include links to student communities or organizations. They're also called Studentenwerk, which have housing or large dorms which are provided to university students. My husband and I actually did this, so we lived in family housing provided by a Catholic organization in Aachen. They're called the KHG, and actually they're not only for Catholic people, but for any student of any religion. And in our case, it was really great. We paid 520 euros for a 60 square meter apartment, and that included kitchen and private bathroom as well. And in the building complex basically lived students which also had their own families. So there were also families with young children as well. So really a very nice environment, and yeah, very affordable as well. That was the rent that we paid in our case. But in the case of Aachen, for example, if you're coming alone and sharing with other students, you could maybe count on with between 300 and 400 euros per month. That price again can go higher or lower, so make sure to do your research beforehand and have everything clear before you're stepping on a plane to fly to the city that you're arriving. So the third part of these large expenses that will take up most of your budget is food and hygiene. So food in Germany is really affordable if you compare to other high-income countries such as the US and within the European Union as well. So to show you guys that, I can show you this map which shows the global grocery index from, again, the website that we talked about before, which is Numbeo. And this map compares the cost of basic grocery supplies around the world in comparison to New York City. So they set New York City as a reference with 100%, and then compare the grocery cost in other countries compared to that 100% in New York. So as you can see, Germany has an index of 50.2, which means that the grocery costs in Germany are 50% cheaper than those in New York City. So that gives you a feel of how affordable the groceries are here in Germany when you compare again with other countries. If you compare with Canada, for example, that price gap or price difference gets smaller. So instead of being the 50% cost of what it costs in New York City, it's 63%. And looking at other places, so for example, France, the index is 72.3, or Australia, it's 70.62. You can see that in general, for a country generating such a high income, or even the same income as in other countries or more, you can get lower cost of groceries overall. I can also give you some concrete examples, such as Spain or Poland, where we've had family living in. In these countries, the groceries cost the same or even more than in Germany, but the income when you start working is twice as high in Germany, even though in this map it shows otherwise, but at least that's my experience. So you can see that a good deal regarding groceries in Germany. So anyways, going back to our cost estimate and you as a student in Germany, I think the most important thing is actually how much you as a student are eating out or not while you're studying here. So of course it depends on the place that you're going to when you're eating out, but in general you can find relatively inexpensive food when you're eating out even. So if you go to eat, let's say, a kebab down the street, it can cost you as low as 3 euros. Or if you go to have a meal at an inexpensive restaurant, let's say, it can cost you around 8 to 9 euros for a plate. Also, as a student, you can eat at the university cafeteria, which is also pretty cheap. So in Aachen, when I was studying, I remember that a full meal at lunch would cost you 2.80 euros for a whole dish. Of course, it wasn't the highest quality or even the healthiest, because it might be a little salty or with too much fat, but it is a full meal at a really low price. But what I would recommend, and it's actually what we did when we were studying, is to do as much grocery shopping as you can and plan your meals in advance. That's definitely more time consuming overall instead of eating out most of the time, but it's definitely better overall for your health since you're controlling the ingredients that you use and fueling your body better, so improving your physical, mental health, having more energy overall, and very important, getting sick much less often than eating every day outside. So as to grocery shopping in Germany, what's good is that if you want to keep your budget as low as possible, you of course have these generic brand options in all supermarkets. So in the large supermarket chain called Rewe, for example, they have the Ja brand, which you can really get most of your basics from. So for really low prices, you can get like spaghetti, bread, cheese, these sort of basic grocery supplies. You could, in theory, practically cover all of your grocery shopping list using only these ingredients, which I wouldn't recommend because they're not the highest quality, I would say. But you could potentially do that if you're really restricted on your budget. In our case, what we did is that we did sort of a combination between these more generic, cheaper products for some things like like toilet paper, for example, cheese every now and then also included some higher quality, more nutritious ingredients such as oat milk, blueberries, chia seeds, for example. So that way overall we could keep our shopping list healthy, nutritious, but also saving some money on other items where we could have no problem using these sort of generic brands. And having that said, I can tell you as reference what my husband and I spent monthly on groceries, give or take. So in our case, we were a two-person household, both students. We were fairly disciplined, so we tried to eat almost all of our meals at home. So did a lot of meal prep and did grocery shopping every week to try to eat practically every meal at home. Of course, we did eat takeout every now and then. So around 2 weeks or so, every 2 weeks we would eat, for example, a kebab or have a coffee outside or a beer every now and then. For this sort of spending profile, we were spending between 280 and 300 euros per month in grocery shopping, which would mean that for one person with a similar spending habit in food like we had, you would have to spend around 150 to 200 euros per month, give or take. Now, if you really want to tighten your belt and go even lower than that, you technically could if you're buying lower quality ingredients at the supermarket, but due to health reasons and your overall performance as a student, requiring a lot of healthy things for your brain, definitely wouldn't recommend. So for our running tally, our grocery cost, give or take, I would estimate with between 200 and 250 euros per month. This, of course, for somebody who is being frugal, so trying to not eat out as much and cooking most of their meals at home. So when I'm talking about groceries, I'm including all items of food, so things that you eat. Now, on top of that, if you include things like hygiene supplies, I would add an approximately 20 to 30 euros per month on top of that. So that would include things like cleaning products, hygiene supplies, skincare things, makeup, etc. This again varies depending on the place where you shop. So if you're going to high-end stores to buy your hygiene and makeup things such as Douglas or Sephora, of course you'd have to spend more than that. But if you're going to drugstores such as DM or Rossmann, then it's definitely going to be cheaper there. So there you have it. Those are, in my opinion, the largest expenses that you'll have coming to Germany to study, which are tuition, rent, and food. These things will cover, as mentioned before, around 70 to 80% of your total costs, meaning that if you focus your cost reductions on these areas is where you'll have the most success in reducing your budget overall. So now let's see what the concrete number is so far in the end of our running tally when we're considering only these three large expenses. So drum roll please. If you're considering a private funded program, in my experience, I would count on to around 1,500 euros per month for these three large blocks of tuition, rent, and food. This again being my particular case in a university city such as Aachen and having this 5,000 euro cost per semester. But if you're pursuing again the state funded program, which has low tuition, so counting on approximately 300 euros per month, that cost so far would be only 650 euros per month. So that cost so far for these three large expenses, I would say is pretty realistic to do in Germany. Again, trying as much to control your spending habits and being relatively frugal in the things that you spend money on. And I think this is a very reasonable price, so a very good price tag to put in for receiving such a high quality education, on top of giving you a very fun and enjoyable experience here studying and living in Germany, as well as opening up many doors of possibilities after graduation. So anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on the cost estimations that I mentioned in the video. Maybe if you're already living in Germany, share what your experience has been so far and help other students as well in the comments. And make sure to click directly and see the part 2 of this video where I'm going to be showing you guys an estimate of all of the rest costs that you'll have if you're thinking of coming to Germany. So we're going to talk about things like mobile phone expenses, as well as cost of clothing, leisure activities, etc. So that in the end, you guys have a complete estimate of how much money you're going to be budgeting to come to Germany and study here. So make sure to check that out. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe as well so that I know that you're enjoying my content. And yeah, hope you have a nice day. Take care.